Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
My name is Samantha, and for 17 long years I served my own family like a hired hand, except I wasn't paid a single dime. I wasn't even allowed to dream of a life beyond endless chores. Instead, I was destined to scrub floors, wash dishes until my hands bled, and polish the perfect image my sisters prided themselves on. Every day, I woke up before the sun, my tiny body already burdened with the weight of expectations I never chose. In our house, where every room gleamed with the shine of superficial perfection, I was the invisible fixture, the quiet servant who kept the family machine running while the spotlight was always fixed on Victoria and Elizabeth, my so-called perfect sisters. I remember the early mornings, the heavy silence punctuated only by the clatter of utensils as I hurriedly set the dining table for one of their extravagant celebrations. Victoria would always be the first to arrive, her laughter as polished as the silverware on the table, her presence a beacon of beauty and self-assurance. Elizabeth, with her sweet smile and carefully chosen words, followed close behind. Meanwhile, I was left in the background, dusting the mantel, tidying up stray moments that no one else cared about. I was born into a family that celebrated perfection, but in that celebration, I was nothing more than the forgotten afterthought. It wasn't just the physical labor. It was the daily reminders that I was never enough. I'd watch as my sisters, draped in designer clothes and oozing confidence, received endless praise from our parents. Their accomplishments were the currency of our home, while my existence was measured only by how well I could serve. Every compliment directed at them was a sharp contrast to the dismissive nods I received, as if my own achievements were invisible. It wasn't long before I began to question, why should my worth be determined solely by my ability to please others? I can still recall a particularly bitter afternoon when I accidentally spilled a glass of lemonade on the immaculate white rug, a mistake that earned a cold glare from Victoria and a dismissive sigh from Elizabeth. In that moment, as I knelt on the floor trying desperately to mop up every drop, I wondered if I would ever be seen as more than just the family's errand runner. The sting of their indifference burrowed deep inside me, a seed of anger that grew with each passing day. There were nights I lay awake, haunted by the silence of my own thoughts, wondering if I'd ever be allowed to live for myself. I often caught myself dreaming of a day when the roles would reverse, a day when I wouldn't have to swallow my pride and serve others while my own desires were trampled underfoot. But as long as the family's picture-perfect facade remained intact, I had to be the obedient one, the quiet martyr who kept the wheels turning even as my spirit slowly withered away. Even in moments when I should have felt pride, a small compliment from a friend, a rare word of appreciation from someone outside those four walls, the harsh echo of home reminded me of my place. I was the background noise to their symphony of perfection, a supporting role in a drama that wasn't meant for me. I learned to hide my tears behind forced smiles, to laugh along with the jokes that never quite landed, and to accept the constant barrage of belittling comments with the resignation of someone who had long ago given up on being seen. Yet, underneath that carefully crafted mask of submission, a fire was slowly being kindled, a burning desire for change that I dared not acknowledge even to myself. Every whispered insult, every overlooked effort, added fuel to that fire. I began to wonder if 17 years of silent servitude could one day be repaid in one final act of defiance. I clutched on his secret memories and hidden resentments like a lifeline, each one a reminder that perhaps, just perhaps, I wasn't meant to be invisible forever. Now, as I stand on the edge of tomorrow's family dinner, a dinner where mother will casually say, "Just watch the kids while we celebrate," I feel that the past is ready to catch up with us all. The night promises to be more than just another celebration. It promises to be the moment when the carefully constructed illusion of perfection finally begins to crumble. Deep down, I know that when every glittering smile and pristine facade falls away, the truth of our family's dark underbelly will be exposed. And I can't help but ask, can one long-suffering soul really change the fate of a family built on lies? Every day was a relentless reminder that I was nothing more than a ghost in my own home. I woke up before the rooster even thought about crowing, pulling myself out of bed with a heaviness that wasn't just physical. It was the burden of a lifetime of servitude. I remember the first morning vividly, the chill in the air, the creak of the wooden floor beneath my bare feet as I padded silently into the kitchen. While Victoria and Elizabeth lounged in silk and perfume later in the day, I was already deep into cleaning and preparing for the endless parade of their whims. It wasn't simply the chores themselves that left their mark. It was the way every task was executed as if my only purpose was to maintain their pristine image. I scrubbed floors until my hands were raw, polished every surface until it shone, and cooked meals with a precision that left little room for error. And yet, every effort I made was met with nothing more than a fleeting glance or a dismissive remark. It was as if my very existence was invisible, a detail to be ignored in the grand tableau of our family's so-called perfection. I can still feel the sting of the countless moments when my contributions were belittled. There was that time I spent the entire afternoon arranging flowers for one of their lavish parties, only to have Victoria roll her eyes and mutter, "Could you be any slower?" Or the day I meticulously ironed a shirt that ended up crumpled by the end of the evening, all because Elizabeth decided to spontaneously change plans. Each slight was a cut, a reminder that my presence was a burden rather than a blessing. Now, dear viewer, I want you to take a moment with me. Have you ever felt so utterly betrayed by the people you love that every day seemed like an endless punishment? Think about it. The betrayal isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes, it's in the quiet cruelty of a dismissive sigh, the cold shoulder, or the way your efforts vanish into thin air without even a thank you. That's how I felt. Each day stacking up like a brick in a wall built to keep me forever confined to the shadows. In the silence of those long evenings, when the house finally settled into its fake calm, I would retreat into my own thoughts. I replayed every humiliation over and over, each moment of being pushed aside while the spotlight shone only on my sisters. I'd watch them laugh and chatter over their perfectly arranged meals, all the while knowing that the labor behind the scenes was my sacrifice. My parents, lost in their admiration for the flawless image of their daughters, never once noticed the slow erosion of my spirit. Yet, as bitter as those memories are, they also became the kindling for a fire I hadn't yet dared to acknowledge openly. The more I endured, the more I began to see the cracks in the veneer of our so-called perfect family. I started to collect these moments of injustice like secret treasures, each one a piece of evidence that said, "You are more than this." I would silently note every sarcastic comment, every brush-off, every time I was relegated to the background. In the quiet of the night, these memories fed a simmering anger that was no longer something I could ignore. I realized that 17 years of being treated like a disposable servant had not only scarred me, but also planted the seeds of something dangerous, the desire for retribution. I began to fantasize about a day when the roles would reverse. A day when I wouldn't have to hide behind a forced smile while my true self withered away in the shadows. Those secret fantasies became my escape, a way to cope with the constant reminder that I was expendable. There were days when I thought about speaking up, of finally confronting Victoria and Elizabeth about the relentless abuse. But fear and a twisted sense of duty held me back. I was trapped, not just by their expectations, but by the deeply ingrained belief that I didn't deserve any better. Yet, beneath that resignation, a part of me was quietly plotting a way out, a way to reclaim my dignity and shatter the illusions that had kept me in chains for so long. Now, as the day of tomorrow's family dinner looms ever closer, a dinner where mother will nonchalantly command, "Just watch the kids while we celebrate," I can feel that the air is charged with an impending reckoning. Every chore I've endured, every tear I've hidden, every slight I've absorbed has built up to this moment. I know that once the facade of perfection is stripped away, the truth will pour out like a long-dammed river. Tonight, as I sit alone with my thoughts and the quiet hum of the house in the background, I can't help but feel that I am standing on the brink of something irreversible. The anger that has been locked away for so long is stirring, ready to burst forth and finally change the course of this family's story. Will the unveiling of these hidden scars lead to my liberation, or will it only deepen the wounds that have festered for years? I have no answers yet, only the cold certainty that tomorrow's dinner will be unlike any celebration we have ever known. Ever since I started paying closer attention, I began to notice that nothing in our household was as perfect as it seemed. The shimmering smiles and polished gestures of Victoria and Elizabeth began to show subtle, but undeniable flaws. Behind their effortless elegance were moments of hesitation, furtive glances, and hushed conversations that betrayed hidden truths. Every so often, while I was busy scrubbing the counters or dusting the antique vases, I'd catch a glimpse of something amiss, a text message that wasn't meant for their eyes, a diary entry left carelessly open, or a whispered exchange that hinted at secrets too explosive for polite conversation. It all started with the little things. One afternoon, as I was tidying up the study, I noticed a leather-bound journal that should have been locked away. Curiosity gnawed at me, and I couldn't resist taking a furtive peek. The diary's entries were written in a meticulous hand, detailing private thoughts, veiled confessions, and hints of double lives that contradicted the image my sisters so proudly flaunted. There were references to clandestine meetings and promises made in the dark, a far cry from the picture-perfect lives they paraded around at every family event. It was like discovering a secret compartment in a safe that I had never known existed. The more I observed, the more I realized that every whispered laugh, every offhand remark, carried layers of meaning. I began to piece together small fragments. A misdirected text that landed on my phone by accident, its contents dripping with innuendo and revelations of plans that didn't include me. A half-heard phone conversation while I was dusting in the hallway, where I caught snippets of words like arrangement, cover-up, and never meant for her to know. It all formed a mosaic of deception, each piece a tiny crack in the immaculate facade my sisters had built. I started to document these moments meticulously. In the quiet hours after everyone had gone to bed, I would sit at my small, battered desk and write down every detail, every suspicious nuance. My pen scratched furiously across the paper as I recounted the day's events. The tone of voice in a careless remark, the way a smile didn't quite reach the eyes, or how a compliment was laced with an undercurrent of disdain. It was as if I was slowly assembling the evidence needed to prove that their perfection was nothing more than a well-rehearsed act. There were times when the irony of it all made me bitterly laugh to myself. Here I was, the invisible servant, forced into a supporting role in their glamorous drama, and yet I was uncovering secrets that they'd never intended for anyone to see. I found humor in the absurdity, thinking, who would have guessed that the perfect sisters, always so careful and pristine, were masters of disguise in their own home? But that humor was always tinged with anger, a reminder of the countless times I had been ignored, dismissed, or outright belittled. Late one rainy evening, as I sat alone in the kitchen with only the hum of the refrigerator for company, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. The screen lit up with a brief, cryptic message. "The mask is slipping. Watch closely tonight." My heart pounded as I reread those words, feeling both a surge of validation and a chill of foreboding. Was someone reaching out to me? Had one of them, perhaps an unexpected ally or even an adversary, decided that I wasn't as insignificant as they'd always presumed? I didn't have time to dwell on it. The message was brief, almost casual, but it confirmed everything I had been suspecting. The perfection they wore was as fragile as glass. That simple message set off a chain reaction in my mind. I began to wonder what other secrets lay hidden behind the glossy veneer. Could it be that my sisters were involved in schemes and deceptions that went far beyond their polished appearances? Were those elegant smiles concealing betrayals that spanned years, maybe even decades? Every thought fed the growing conviction that the time for passive suffering was over. I was no longer content to be the silent witness to their duplicity. I needed to know the truth, and I needed to expose it. Every day, as I performed my duties with the same resigned efficiency, my mind raced with possibilities. I imagined late-night meetings, whispered conspiracies, and the unraveling of a web that had been spun with such care that I had never suspected its existence. I began to view the household not as a home, but as a stage, a place where every interaction was a performance designed to hide a much darker reality. Now, as I sit here with my secret notes and half-read diary entries spread out before me, I feel the weight of what I've discovered. Each piece of evidence is a small victory against the years of silence and submission. I know that with every detail I uncover, I'm stepping closer to a truth that will shatter the illusion of perfection my sisters have so desperately clung to. The cracks in their facade are no longer just minor imperfections. They are fissures waiting to widen, to erupt into a revelation that could transform everything. And with tomorrow's dinner looming, a dinner where Mother will once again nonchalantly command me to just watch the kids, I am armed with the knowledge that their perfect world is built on lies. The stage is being set for a dramatic confrontation, and I can almost hear the distant echoes of that fateful night calling me forward. I take a deep breath and gather my resolve, knowing that tonight, the final pieces of the puzzle will fall into place. The hidden double lives, the whispered secrets, the very essence of their deception, All of it is coming to light. And when it does, there will be no turning back. Late at night, when the house was draped in silence, and the only sound was the hum of distant traffic, I began to dig into the memories I'd long tried to forget. In the solitude of my cramped room, I dusted off old photographs and yellowed letters, forgotten relics that held the bitter truth of our family's history. As I flipped through a battered photo album, I saw a little girl with bright eyes and hopeful smiles. That little girl was me, a child who once believed in the magic of family, unaware that beneath every gentle laugh and tender hug lay secrets that would eventually poison our bonds. I recalled the day when I first sensed something was terribly off. It was a rainy afternoon, the kind where droplets raced down the window pane in a desperate escape. I had overheard a hushed conversation between Mother and Victoria in the kitchen. Their voices, usually so controlled and sweet, carried an urgency I couldn't ignore. "It has to be done," Victoria whispered, her tone laced with a strange mix of resolve and regret. I pressed my ear against the cool wood of the door, heart pounding as I caught fragments of their plan. A secret deal meant to preserve their perfect image at any cost. The conversation was cloaked in mystery, but its implications were clear. Sacrifices had been made long before I was even aware of my role in this twisted performance. That day, I learned that our family perfection was built on a foundation of lies and compromises. My father, who was always seen as the stoic pillar of strength, had made choices that betrayed our trust. I remember the quiet moment when he sat me down in our tiny living room, his voice low and solemn. "Sometimes," he said, almost as if confessing a sin, "we must do things we're not proud of to keep the ones we love safe." I didn't understand then that his words were a code for secrets he never spoke of openly. Secrets that would later reveal how my sister's bright smiles were maintained through silent collusion and mutual complicity. One letter in particular changed everything. Tucked behind a faded family portrait, I discovered a handwritten note addressed to Mother. The ink was slightly smudged by time, and the message was cryptic. "The price of perfection is a lifetime of silence. The truth must never see the light, or all will be lost." Reading those words sent a chill down my spine. It was as if I had stumbled upon the forbidden backstage of our family's grand performance, a revelation that our cherished image was sustained by mutual sacrifices and unspoken agreements. My sisters, the paragons of grace and beauty, had willingly participated in a pact that I, the forgotten one, was never allowed to question. As I continued my solitary investigation, more memories surfaced, each one a painful reminder of the cost of their perfection. I remembered the night when, as a teenager, I had returned home from school only to find the dining room table set for a celebration I wasn't invited to. The air was thick with laughter and clinking glasses as Victoria and Elizabeth toasted to their successes. I stood at the doorway, heart pounding, feeling every ounce of rejection as if it were a physical blow. That night, I realized that their world was not mine to share, that I was destined to remain in the shadows while they basked in the adoration of everyone around them. There was also the incident during one winter holiday when I discovered a secret stash of letters tucked inside a drawer. These letters, written by an unknown correspondent, hinted at deals and compromises that were made to secure the family's social standing. The words were tender, yet laced with a bitterness that spoke of sacrifices no one talked about. I learned that the laughter at our family dinners often masked the sorrow of deals struck in desperation, deals that left scars invisible to the outside world. Each memory was a puzzle piece, and as I pieced them together, a clearer, but more devastating picture emerged. The perfection my sisters radiated was nothing more than a carefully curated illusion, maintained by the silent agreement to sacrifice honesty for image. Their smiles were genuine only in part. Behind them lay a history of hidden bargains and betrayals that had been woven into the fabric of our lives from long ago. In that dim, quiet room, with the past swirling around me, like autumn leaves caught in a cold wind, I realized that my entire life had been built on a lie. The more I uncovered, the more I felt the urge to reclaim my own narrative, a narrative that had been suppressed for 17 long years. I began to understand that my servitude was not just a series of unfortunate events, but the direct result of choices made by those I once trusted implicitly. The seeds of resentment I had nurtured were now transforming into a burning determination. I vowed to let the truth, however painful, finally break free from its chains. Now, armed with these revelations, I stand at the precipice of a momentous turning point. The upcoming family dinner isn't just another evening of forced smiles and quiet subservience. It's the stage where every hidden secret, every buried memory, will come crashing out into the light. With every revelation of the past, I prepare myself for a confrontation that could shatter our carefully maintained world forever. And as I close the album, my heart heavy yet resolute, I know there's no turning back. The day before the dinner, an uneasy calm blanketed our home, a deceptive silence that masked a storm brewing beneath. I moved through the corridors with a heavy heart and a mind churning with every secret I had uncovered. The artifacts of my hidden research lay scattered in a battered journal, faded photographs, torn letters, and scribbled notes that chronicled years of quiet abuse. I clutched these remnants like battle plans, knowing that every one of them was a piece of the puzzle that would soon shatter our family's carefully curated illusion. That afternoon, as I dutifully tidied the living room for the upcoming celebration, I couldn't shake the anticipation mingling with dread. The house was a pristine stage, every cushion fluffed, every surface gleaming, and every corner silently screaming of the perfection Victoria and Elizabeth demanded. I moved like a ghost among them, the unseen hand that made everything appear flawless, while I nursed the wounds of years spent in the background. Then came the moment I had both dreaded and secretly longed for. In the middle of our routine family gathering, a casual meeting that was supposed to be light and cheerful, Mother's voice rang out, slicing through the pretentious calm with disarming nonchalance. "Just watch the kids while we celebrate." It was a statement so offhand and routine that for a split second it almost seemed affectionate. But to me, it was a loaded command, a final reminder of my perpetual role as the invisible servant, the expendable support whose very existence was defined by sacrifice. The words echoed in my ears like the tolling of a death knell. Mother, in her well-practiced neutrality, had no inkling that her casual order was the match that would ignite everything I had been holding inside. The room fell into a brief, awkward pause as my sisters exchanged knowing glances, their smiles tightening imperceptibly. I watched Victoria's eyes flicker with a mixture of superiority and something darker, a silent challenge, perhaps. Elizabeth's smile was a mask that hid a swirl of conflicting emotions. And there I was, forced to accept this role once more, even as every fiber of my being screamed that enough was enough. In that charged moment, I could feel the years of servitude crystallize into resolve. I remembered the countless afternoons when I had scrubbed the floors until my skin was raw, the nights when I had quietly wept in the dark because my dreams had no space to grow. I recalled every time I had been sidelined, every slight that had chipped away at the person I once hoped to be. And now, with Mother's words hanging heavy in the air, I knew that tomorrow's dinner was not just another family celebration. It was the crucible in which my long-held anger would finally be transformed into action. After the meeting dispersed and the facade of normalcy slowly resumed its place, I retreated to the quiet sanctuary of my room. I sat at my worn desk, the envelope with the mysterious note, "The price of perfection is a lifetime of silence. The truth must never see the light, or all will be lost," still pressed against my palm. My mind raced with plans and counterplans, each one more daring than the last. The evidence I had gathered, the stories of deceit I had unearthed, were now my weapons. They would be laid bare for all to see at the dinner, a dinner that, unbeknownst to them, would be their last celebration as they knew it. The irony of it all wasn't lost on me. For years, I had played the part of the dutiful servant, the silent martyr who accepted humiliation with a trembling smile. But now, with every detail of my past laid out before me, I began to see that my servitude was not a curse to bear, but a burden I could finally cast off. I started to rehearse in my mind the confrontation that would come. I imagined the shocked faces, the splintering of their perfect veneer, the raw truth spilling out like a torrent. It was both terrifying and exhilarating, a heady mix that made my pulse race faster with each passing second. I could almost hear Mother's voice in my head, a voice that had once reassured me that everything was for the good of the family. Now, that voice had become an instrument of my undoing, a reminder that I was always expected to play a role designed by others. And I wondered bitterly, with a mix of resentment and grim determination, how long could I continue to be the sacrificial lamb for a family that valued appearances over authenticity? As the twilight deepened into evening, I stepped outside for a brief walk. The cool air was a welcome relief from the stifling confines of our meticulously maintained home. I stared up at the gathering dark clouds, each one a portent of the storm that was about to break. In that moment, I felt both the weight of my 17-year-long servitude and the electrifying promise of what was to come. I vowed to myself that tomorrow, when the dinner began, every whispered secret, every hidden betrayal, would be brought into the harsh light of truth. And when it did, there would be no turning back. With a final, determined glance at the looming silhouette of the house, its windows glowing like the eyes of a silent judge, I returned inside. I tucked the envelope away with the other evidence, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and fierce anticipation. Tomorrow's dinner would be the turning point. I wasn't just going to watch the kids. I was going to watch the collapse of everything that had kept me chained for so long. The hours before dinner felt like living inside a ticking time bomb, a constant, pulsing reminder that tonight, everything would change. I retreated to the one place in our house where no one ever looked, my tiny, cluttered room. Here, amongst faded photographs and scribbled notes, I began my final preparations. Every piece of evidence I had collected over these long, dark years lay before me like the tools of a revolution. I sat down at my battered desk, my hands trembling as I spread out the letters, diary entries, and even that small flash drive containing the recorded whispers of our family's deceit. I reread each note with the intensity of someone who has spent a lifetime in silence. The envelope with the handwritten message, "The price of perfection is a lifetime of silence. The truth must never see the light, or all will be lost," was pressed tightly against my heart. In that moment, I realized that all those 17 years of unnoticed servitude had led to this one point in time, when I would decide whether to remain the invisible servant or seize the power of truth. I meticulously reviewed every detail. I ran my fingers over the faded ink of old letters, confirming that each accusation and every hidden betrayal was documented. I double-checked the flash drive's contents, watching the grainy images and listening to the hushed voices that revealed the hidden sins behind my sister's sparkling smiles. With every piece, a surge of both anger and resolve washed over me. Tonight, I wouldn't just be the one cleaning up after everyone. I would be the one cleaning up this mess of lies once and for all. Pacing the narrow hallway, I could almost feel the house itself, holding its breath in anticipation. Every creak of the wooden floor, every distant murmur from the other rooms, underscored the quiet before the storm. I paused at the window and peered out at the dark sky, a swirl of clouds hinting at the tempest to come. In that reflective moment, a question echoed in my mind, a question I want to share with you too. Have you ever felt so desperate to reclaim your own life that you were willing to risk everything, even if it meant shattering the only world you'd ever known? The answer, I knew, was as complicated as the tangled threads of my own existence. There was no simple way out of years of quiet abuse and neglect. I had spent my entire life playing a part, a role designed by others, a role that reduced me to a shadow, serving the glittering facade of my sister's perfection. But no more. Tonight, as I stood in that fragile solitude, I realized that my identity was not tied to their expectations. I was not meant to be invisible. I was meant to be seen, to speak out, and to reclaim every stolen moment of my life. I moved back to my desk and methodically arranged the evidence in the order I planned to present it. Every photograph, every letter, every audio clip was a fragment of the truth I had painstakingly pieced together. I rehearsed in my head the words I would say, the questions I would ask. Each sentence a calculated strike aimed at dismantling the carefully constructed illusion that had held our family hostage for so long. I imagined the moment when I would stand before them at dinner, and I allowed myself to feel both the weight of past pain and the fierce exhilaration of imminent retribution. As I practiced my voice in front of the mirror, I could see a stranger staring back at me, a face marred by sorrow, but also alight with determination. Gone was the timid, obedient girl who had once cowered in the background. In her place was someone hardened by years of neglect, someone who was ready to take a stand. I spoke softly at first, almost to test the sound of my own conviction. No more. I repeated it until the word echoed in the empty room, each syllable a promise to myself that I would no longer be defined by the role forced upon me. The final twist of preparation came unexpectedly. Just as I was about to secure the evidence in a hidden compartment beneath my bed, my phone vibrated with a new message from an unknown number. The text was brief and chilling. "Tonight, trust no one. Not even those you think you know." A shiver ran down my spine. Was this a warning? A reminder that there were forces at work, I hadn't yet comprehended? For a split second, doubt gnawed at my resolve. But then I clenched my fists and wiped away a tear. There was no room for hesitation now. I had built up too much anger and too many scars over these long, silent years. This was my moment. I carefully secured the flash drive, tucking it away with the other documents, and prepared a final list of cues and reminders that would help me stay on track once the dinner began. I knew that once I stepped out from behind this thin veil of preparation, there would be no turning back. The stage was set, and the roles were about to be reversed. I would no longer be the invisible servant. I would be the voice that demanded truth and justice. Taking one last deep, steadying breath, I whispered into the quiet room, "Tonight the mask falls." With that declaration echoing in the silence, I felt a mixture of dread and fierce anticipation. The battle between the person I had been forced to be and the one I yearned to become had reached its final prelude. As I turned off the lamp and let darkness reclaim the room, I knew that when tomorrow's dinner began, everything would change. I was ready to risk it all, because at long last, I was ready to be seen. The night finally arrived, and with it, the culmination of 17 years of quiet endurance. I found myself standing in the vast dining room, a space that always looked like it belonged in a magazine, with its glistening chandelier, perfectly set table, and crisp white linens that shone under the soft glow of candlelight. Every detail was arranged to perfection, a stage for my sister's nightly parade of flawless elegance. And there I was, forced to play the role of the dutiful servant, my presence invisible amid the sparkle and chatter. As I moved about the room, carrying platters of delicately arranged hors d'oeuvres and refilling glasses of sparkling cider, I could feel my pulse racing beneath the calm veneer I had so carefully constructed over the years. Every clink of silverware and every polite laugh from the assembled guests reminded me of all the times I had been relegated to the background, a mere prop in their performance of perfection. Tonight, however, that facade was about to crack. I made my way around the table, discreetly keeping an eye on Victoria and Elizabeth. Victoria, in her customary high-neck dress and immaculate hair, held court at the head of the table with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Elizabeth, ever the charming co-conspirator, moved gracefully among the guests, her laughter light and seemingly carefree. But I knew better. Every smile, every subtle glance, was part of a carefully rehearsed act. And tonight, I was holding the script that would unravel it all. As I poured wine into delicate glasses, I caught snippets of hushed conversation between my sisters and our mother. Their voices, layered with condescension and secretive tones, swirled around me like a bitter perfume. I forced a polite smile as I delivered another round of drinks, all the while feeling the weight of the evidence I'd hidden away. Tucked securely in the inner pocket of my uniform was the flash drive and a folder of documents that detailed years of hidden betrayals and meticulously concealed deceptions. At one point, while I was serving dessert, a beautifully arranged display of petit fours and sugared fruit, a fleeting look passed between Victoria and Elizabeth. Their eyes, dark with an emotion I couldn't quite name, met mine for a fraction of a second. It was a look that promised they knew something was off, that my calm facade was no longer as impenetrable as it once seemed. My heart hammered in response, and I almost dropped the tray. I composed myself quickly, smoothing the edge of my apron and forcing my smile back into place. The act had to go on until the moment was right. The tension in the room was palpable, a subtle undercurrent beneath the festive clamor. I moved quietly between groups of relatives, some exchanging pleasantries with an air of forced merriment, others whispering over their wine glasses as if sharing a secret too dangerous to speak aloud. I could sense that something was stirring, an anticipation that something was about to break. Every detail, every small smile or furtive glance seemed loaded with hidden meaning. I felt as if time were slowing down. The clatter of cutlery, the murmur of voices, even the soft strains of background music, all faded into a low hum as I focused on the moment. In the depths of my mind, I rehearsed the confrontation over and over. I imagined stepping forward, laying out the damning evidence for all to see, watching as the mask of perfection shattered into 1,000 irreparable pieces. My inner voice whispered, "Tonight, nothing will remain the same." Yet, outwardly, I maintained the calm, controlled persona I had been forced to adopt for so long. Around mid-dinner, when the room's chatter reached a lull, I excused myself briefly under the guise of checking on the kitchen. As I slipped into the corridor, the cool air hit me like a jolt, a reminder that the storm was nearly upon us. My fingers brushed over the hidden envelope and the flash drive in my pocket, and a mixture of dread and fierce determination coursed through me. I texted a single word into my phone, a silent confirmation that tonight I was ready to tip the scales. The message read, "Now." Returning to the dining room, I resumed my duties, my eyes never straying far from the commanding presence of my sisters and the nervous glances exchanged among the guests. Every smile, every laugh, now felt tainted by the knowledge of what was to come. I could almost see the future unfolding, shattered porcelain on the floor, raised voices in disbelief, and the unraveling of a family that had long hidden its darkest secrets behind the veneer of perfection. As dessert was cleared away and the conversation shifted to reminiscing about past celebrations, I felt the decisive moment building within me. The room, once so full of light and false joy, now seemed dimmer, as if the truth was casting its long shadow over every corner. My sister's perfect smiles wavered ever so slightly, and I sensed that the carefully curated evening was hanging by a thread. I stood by the side of the table, every sense on high alert, waiting for that one spark, an opportunity to expose the hidden rot that had festered for far too long. I knew that once I stepped forward, there would be no turning back. The dinner, which had been nothing more than a celebration of superficial perfection, was now on the brink of becoming the stage for a reckoning. And in that silent, charged moment, I realized that the night was not merely a gathering. It was the opening act of a long-awaited confrontation that would leave us all forever changed. In a heartbeat, the delicate balance of our meticulously staged dinner shattered. One moment, I was the silent servant weaving through the clinks of fine china and polite laughter. The next, I was stepping forward into the glaring spotlight of truth. The evidence, the flash drive, the carefully compiled folder of letters, photographs, and damning diary entries, felt heavy in my grasp, each piece a promise of retribution for 17 years of silence. I took a deep, trembling breath and moved toward the center of the dining room. The chatter that had filled the space like a warm blanket suddenly faltered, replaced by a pregnant silence as every head turned toward me. My sister's eyes widened in disbelief. Victoria's face, once the epitome of flawless composure, now betrayed shock and a flicker of something darker. Fear, perhaps. Elizabeth's smile, so practiced and bright moments before, crumbled into a grimace. And Mother's expression wavered between confusion and a dawning realization that something was irrevocably amiss. "Enough," I said, my voice echoing through the now-still room. I set the evidence on the long, polished table with a deliberate clatter that resounded like a judge's gavel. Tonight, the mask of perfection falls, and the truth, painful, messy, undeniable, will be our only guest. A murmur of disbelief rippled among the relatives. Some guests exchanged uneasy glances, while others shifted in their seats, suddenly aware of the gravity in the air. The room, once filled with the easy chatter of a family celebration, now pulsed with tension and unspoken accusations. Victoria was the first to speak, her voice trembling but laced with a stubborn defiance. "Samantha, what are you doing? This isn't the time," she began, but I cut her off with a raised hand. "For years, you've hidden behind smiles and elegance," I said, my tone growing firmer with every word. "You made every celebration about you, while I was forced to be nothing more than a ghost in the background. Tonight, I'm no longer willing to let our family's perfection be built on my suffering." I picked up one of the old letters, holding it high so that all eyes could see the faded ink and the bitter truth it contained. "This," I declared, "is proof that every lie, every sacrifice you demanded, was never about love. It was about control. Mother, Victoria, Elizabeth, for 17 long years, you treated me as if I were disposable, a tool to polish your image. And now, I'm taking back what is rightfully mine. The truth." The room erupted. Shouts and gasps collided with the clatter of overturned chairs. Mother's eyes welled with tears as she struggled to find the words to defend the life she had built, while Victoria and Elizabeth fumbled for a response that never came. Some of the older relatives tried to intervene, their voices quavering as they pleaded for calm. But the dam had burst, and the carefully constructed facade was crumbling before our eyes. As the chaos swelled, I took a steadying step back and scanned the room, feeling an odd mix of triumph and despair. Every whispered secret, every forgotten slight from years past was now out in the open, splintering our family's veneer of perfection into 1,000 painful fragments. I could see raw emotion etched on every face. Guilt, betrayal, anger, and even a reluctant understanding that the life we had all known was nothing but a fragile lie. A relative from the far corner shouted, "What do you expect to happen now?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and for a moment, I felt the full weight of the consequences. Would exposing these secrets finally liberate me, or would it doom us all to a fate of irreparable loss? I couldn't say for sure. All I knew was that I had already passed the point of no return. As voices clashed and accusations flew like shards of broken glass, I realized that this wasn't merely a dinner. It was a reckoning. The celebration that had once signified joy and unity was now a battleground where the truth fought to emerge from the shadows. In that volatile moment, I looked around at the faces of those who had shaped my life, and I wondered if any of us could ever truly recover from the revelations now laid bare. In the midst of the chaos, a bitter, ironic smile tugged at my lips. I had spent so long hiding in the background, but now I stood at the center of a storm that would change everything. My heart pounded with a mix of exhilaration and sorrow as I realized that for every secret I had unearthed, there would be consequences I could never have imagined. The old order was collapsing, and the pieces were scattering into an uncertain future. As I met the eyes of each family member, some burning with anger, others filled with regret, I knew that the night had only just begun. The revelations had ignited a wildfire of emotions, and no one in that room would be the same when the flames finally died down. I took one last look at the evidence spread out on the table, a silent testament to years of hidden pain, and whispered, "Tonight, we all face the truth." And with that, the final act of our long-hidden drama was underway. In the midst of the chaos, the dinner's veneer of civility dissolved into raw, uncontrollable emotion. Chairs scraped harshly against the floor, and voices, once polite and measured, erupted into shouts and bitter accusations. I stood there, heart hammering, as the weight of years of silent suffering crashed over me in an avalanche of sound and fury. In that moment, I realized there was no going back. Every carefully hidden secret was now splintering the family's facade into irreparable fragments. It all came to a head when Victoria, her face contorted in a mix of rage and disbelief, slammed her hand on the table. "You think you can just waltz in here and ruin everything," she spat, her words sharp enough to cut through the tension like shattered glass. Elizabeth's eyes were wide, her usual poise shattered as she sputtered, "Samantha, what have you done?" Their voices mingled with those of relatives demanding answers, and I could feel the air thick with the stench of betrayal. I took a step forward, every fiber of my being trembling with a cocktail of vindication and dread. "I've done what I had to," I declared, my voice wavering between defiant strength and an almost palpable sorrow. 17 years of being nothing more than your shadow, your invisible servant. This is the moment when I finally reclaim my life." The words hung in the air, heavy with years of pent-up anger and unspoken pain. As I spoke, I felt an inner conflict tearing at me. In that moment of raw truth, I questioned whether I had become the very monster I despised. Was my thirst for justice now driving me to destroy the only family I'd ever known? I could see the flicker of doubt in my own eyes, the momentary hesitation before my resolve hardened again. The taste of revenge was bitter, and the cost of tearing down the old order might be too high. Yet, it was a price I had been paying for far too long. A relative from the back, voice cracking with disillusionment, demanded, "Is this really what you wanted?" His question, though innocent, cut through the din, leaving a pregnant silence in its wake. For one excruciating heartbeat, I wondered if exposing the dark underbelly of our perfection would ultimately lead to my own downfall. But then I remembered every tear, every whispered humiliation, every sacrifice I had been forced to make. I wouldn't go back to being invisible. In that charged moment, I did the unthinkable. I reached for the ornate vase at the center of the table, a vase that had symbolized so much of their curated perfection, and with a force born of years of suppressed fury, I hurled it across the room. It shattered against the wall, its fragments scattering like the pieces of my past. A collective gasp filled the room. The sound was like a starting gun, signaling that the point of no return had been irrevocably crossed. The impact was immediate. My sisters recoiled, their eyes filling with a mix of shock, fear, and something akin to regret. Mother's face crumpled, And even those who had silently endured years of quiet despair now found their tongues tied in the face of undeniable truth. In the midst of the uproar, I caught a glimpse of myself in a darkened window, a reflection of a person I barely recognized. There was a cold determination in my eyes, but also a trace of sorrow that reminded me of the child I once was. As the chaos continued, voices overlapping, accusations thrown like daggers, I realized that every person in that room was now irrevocably altered. The celebration of perfection had disintegrated into a battlefield of raw emotions and irreversible decisions. I felt a strange mix of triumph and regret. Triumphant because I had finally broken the cycle of abuse. Regretful because I knew that the family I once hoped to love would never be the same again. In the ensuing mayhem, I found a brief moment of solitude near the shattered remnants of the vase. I pressed my hand against the cool glass shards, feeling the sting as a metaphor for the scars I had endured. Is this the price of freedom? I whispered to myself, my voice barely audible over the clamor. The question hung in the air, unanswered and raw, much like the wounds that had festered for years. I knew that tonight marked a point of no return. There would be no mending the bonds that had been so carelessly shattered. The relentless pursuit of perfection had been exposed for what it was, a fragile lie built on sacrifice and silence. And as I looked around at the faces contorted with shock and despair, I understood that every action, every hidden truth now set free, had led us to this irreversible moment. Standing amid the ruin of our family's carefully constructed world, I realized that while the flames of this night might eventually burn out, the scars they leave behind would be permanent. The cost of reclaiming my identity had been high, and I wasn't sure if the newfound freedom would ever truly heal the deep wounds of the past. Yet in that moment, I resolved that I could no longer live in the shadows of their perfection. With a heavy heart and a resolve as unyielding as the shattered vase on the floor, I stepped forward into the storm of consequences, ready to face whatever might come next. There was no retreat now. The die had been cast, and the final act of our family's long-hidden drama was set in motion. The morning after that fateful dinner, the house felt as if it were holding its breath, each room an echo of what had transpired the night before. I wandered through the silent corridors, the remnants of shattered porcelain and spilled secrets still fresh in the minds of everyone present. The celebration, once a symbol of our family's manufactured perfection, was now a distant memory replaced by a raw, uncertain reality. As I passed by the dining room, I could almost see the ghostly outline of the table, strewn with evidence of a rebellion that could never be forgotten. In the days that followed, every conversation was laced with a cautious tension. Victoria and Elizabeth moved like wounded animals, their usual swagger replaced by furtive glances and whispered apologies that went unheard. Mother sat quietly in the living room, her eyes red-rimmed from sleepless nights and regret, unable to mend the irreparable rift that had splintered our family. Even the relatives, once eager participants in our nightly charade, now lingered in a suspended state of shock and disbelief. Every smile that once glimmered with forced joy was replaced by a numb resignation. It seemed that our last celebration was not a joyful gathering at all, but the final act of a long, painful performance. I, too, was left to confront the consequences of my actions. In the aftermath, I found myself oscillating between a fierce sense of liberation and the heavy burden of uncertainty. Standing alone on the back porch one chilly evening, I stared out at a sky tinged with the muted colors of dawn. I asked myself if exposing every lie and every hidden betrayal had truly set me free, or if I had, in my quest for justice, built a prison of my own making. The taste of revenge was bitter and complex. It was as if I had sipped from a cup of truth that left a residue of sorrow on my tongue. In the days that followed, whispers of my actions spread beyond our immediate family. Some called me a hero, a long-suffering soul finally reclaiming her life. Others branded me a traitor who had shattered the only semblance of unity we had ever known. Friends and acquaintances debated in hushed tones. Was my rebellion a necessary act of self-liberation or a reckless plunge into chaos that would leave us all scarred beyond repair? I listened to these voices with a heavy heart, knowing that their judgments would forever be intertwined with the pain I had endured. Late one evening, as I sat alone in the quiet of my now empty room, I began to piece together the fragments of a future that was as uncertain as it was daunting. I found solace in small acts: a cup of strong coffee, the steady rhythm of rain tapping on the window, and even a stray smile from a neighbor who had witnessed my transformation. Yet, the echoes of that night still haunted me. I could still hear the crash of the shattered vase, feel the weight of every word spoken in anger, and see the tear-streaked faces of those who had once embodied the ideal I was forced to serve. And so, with each passing day, I learned that some wounds never fully heal. They simply change form, lingering in the corners of our lives like shadows. I began to understand that the final celebration was not an end, but rather the closing of one chapter and the uncertain beginning of another. In exposing the rot that had festered beneath our family's perfect veneer, I had not restored balance, but unleashed a torrent of consequences that would ripple into our futures. Now, as I stand at this crossroads, between redemption and ruin, I ask you, the listener, to ponder the true cost of reclaiming your voice after years of silent suffering. Was my act of defiance a necessary shattering of a toxic cycle, or did it condemn us all to a lifetime of fractured relationships and lingering regret? I cannot say for certain. All I know is that in that final dinner, the masquerade of perfection fell, and with it, the old life I had known crumbled into dust. I take a deep breath and look toward the uncertain horizon. In that fragile moment, a small, ironic smile touches my lips, a silent acknowledgement that sometimes the only way to build something new is to let the old, even if cherished, burn away. Perhaps one day, amidst the ashes of our shattered past, we will find the strength to rebuild. Or maybe the scars will remain, a permanent reminder of the price we pay for secrets and lies. And so, as the sun sets on what once was a celebration of perfection, I step forward into the twilight of an ambiguous tomorrow. With each step, I carry both the freedom of truth and the heavy burden of its consequences. The final question lingers in the cool night air. Was it worth it?